The night before our divorce hearing, my husband looked at the paintings covering our living room walls and laughed. "You know what's funny, Elena?" he said. "All these years you thought you were an artist?" I slowly lowered my brush. He pointed toward a large canvas hanging above the fireplace. "That thing isn't art, it's a hobby." I stared at the painting. It was called The Last Light. For 3 years, I had worked on it in secret moments, after cooking dinner, after cleaning the house, after putting our children to bed. My husband Daniel had never once asked what it meant. He only complained about the smell of paint. "You've wasted thousands of dollars on this nonsense," he continued. "Tomorrow the judge will see exactly what you contributed to this marriage." I felt something inside me break, not because he insulted my painting, because after 22 years together, he still didn't know me. Daniel had built a successful investment company. He drove expensive cars, wore tailored suits, and spent weekends at golf clubs with men who knew his name. I had spent 22 years building our home, but there was one thing he never understood. I had been painting long before I met him. When I was 19, a professor had told me I had an unusual eye for light. "You don't paint what people see," she had said. "You paint what they feel." I believed her, until I married Daniel. After our wedding, he convinced me to stop painting. "You can do it when we're financially comfortable." Then came our first child, then our second, then his business. Years disappeared, but I never stopped creating. I painted at night, quietly, secretly, and The Last Light became the most important painting I had ever made. It showed an old woman standing beside a window at sunset. Half of her face was illuminated by golden light. The other half disappeared into shadow. To everyone else, it was simply a woman. But to me, it was my mother. And it was me. The woman represented every person who had spent years believing they had disappeared, only to discover that their light was still there. 2 months before the divorce hearing, something unexpected happened. A small gallery owner named Marcus Bell visited our home. He had been invited by a mutual friend. He walked past the paintings without saying much. Then he stopped, in front of The Last Light. He stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, he whispered, "Who painted this?" I raised my hand. "You?" I nodded. He looked at Daniel. "Did you know your wife made this?" Daniel laughed. "She's been painting for years. She enjoys it." Marcus didn't laugh. "Sir, this isn't a hobby." He asked me several questions. Where had I studied? Who taught me? What exhibitions had I participated in? I had never exhibited professionally. I had never even tried. Marcus asked if he could photograph the painting. I agreed. 3 days later, he called. "There are people who want to see your work." I almost refused. Daniel was already preparing for our divorce, but something told me to go. Marcus arranged a private viewing in New York. There were collectors, critics, and gallery owners. I stood in the corner wearing a simple black dress, feeling completely out of place. Then a woman approached me. She stared at my painting. "Did you really make this?" "Yes." "How long?" 3 years. She smiled. "Then you've been hiding something extraordinary." Within weeks, my paintings began attracting attention. But The Last Light was different. 2 major collectors wanted it. Then 4. Then 7. Marcus told me the painting could potentially sell for millions. I thought he was exaggerating. Daniel thought it was ridiculous. When I told him someone had offered $2 million, he laughed. $2 million? He shook his head. "People are playing with you." I didn't argue. The divorce hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. On Thursday night, Daniel came home furious. "I heard you're selling that painting." "Yes." "That painting belongs to the marital estate." I looked at him calmly. "You said it was worthless." His face hardened. "That was before someone offered money." I almost smiled. "So now it's valuable? Everything has a price." "No," I said quietly. "Some things have meaning." The next morning, I walked into the auction house. The painting was scheduled as the final major lot. I had never attended an auction before. My hands were shaking. The auctioneer introduced the painting. Lot 17, The Last Light by Elena. The opening bid was $5 million. A man in the front raised his paddle. 6, another bidder answered. 7. The numbers climbed. $10 million, $15 million, $20 million. My heart was pounding. Then someone offered $30 million. The room became completely silent. Another bidder raised his paddle. 35, 40. My breath stopped. Then came the final bid. $48 million. The auctioneer looked around. Any advance? Silence. He raised his hammer. Sold. The room erupted in applause. $48 million. I sat there frozen, not because of the money, because 24 hours earlier my husband had called the same painting worthless. My phone began vibrating. It was Daniel, I answered. What happened? He demanded. I said nothing. Are you there? Yes. How much? I looked at the giant screen displaying the final price. 48 million. There was silence. Then he whispered, What? I smiled for the first time in months. Your worthless painting just sold for $48 million. The divorce hearing began less than an hour later. Daniel arrived with his lawyers. He looked confident, until Marcus walked into the courtroom with the auction documents. The judge reviewed the papers. Then she looked at Daniel. You previously described your wife's artwork as having no value? Daniel shifted in his chair. I was speaking emotionally. The judge raised an eyebrow. Well, the market appears to disagree with you. Daniel's lawyer tried to argue that the painting was marital property, but my attorney presented evidence showing that I had created it independently, purchased the materials myself, and maintained records of my work. The final decision didn't give Daniel the fortune he expected. More importantly, it gave me something money couldn't buy, my freedom. After the hearing, I walked outside. The autumn wind moved through my hair. For the first time in 22 years, nobody was waiting for me to cook dinner. Nobody was telling me what my work was worth. Nobody was telling me who I was. Marcus approached me. What's next? I looked at the city skyline. I think I finally have time to find out. 6 months later, my first solo exhibition opened. Hundreds of people came. The walls were filled with paintings I had created during the years when I believed nobody cared. One painting was called The Woman Who Waited. Another was 22 Winters. And in the center hung a new canvas. It showed a woman walking away from a dark house toward a sunrise. I called it Worth. At the opening, a little girl stood in front of it with her mother. Mom, she whispered, why is she walking away? Her mother smiled. Because she finally remembered who she was. I stood across the room, listening, and I realized something. Daniel had been wrong. My paintings were never worthless. I had simply spent too many years listening to someone who couldn't see their value. The $48 million changed my life, but the real victory happened long before the auction. It happened the moment I picked up my brush again. Because sometimes the greatest masterpiece isn't the one hanging on the wall. Sometimes it's the life you finally have the courage to paint for yourself.